clarity's sake, and of course there are many complications. If you are given coffee or beer where you expected, and would have been satisfied with, water, then of course you get a pleasure of the first kind, allaying of thirst, and one of the second, a nice taste, at the same time. Again, an addiction may turn what was once a pleasure of the second kind into one of the first. For the temperate man an occasional glass of wine is a treat like the smell of the bean field. But to the alcoholic, whose palate and digestion have long since been destroyed, no liquor gives any pleasure except that of relief from an unbearable craving. So far as he can still discern tastes at all, he rather dislikes it, but it is better than the misery of remaining sober. Yet through all their permutations and combinations the distinction between the two classes remains tolerably clear. We may call them need pleasures and pleasures of appreciation. The resemblance between these need pleasures and the need loves in my first chapter will occur to everyone. But there, you remember, I confessed that I had to resist a tendency to disparage the need loves or even to say they were not loves at all. Here, for most people, there may be an opposite inclination. It would be very easy to spread ourselves in laudation of the need pleasures and to frown upon those that are appreciatives, the one so natural, a word to conjure with, so necessary, so shielded from excess by their very naturalness, the other unnecessary and opening the door to every kind of luxury and vice. If we were short of matter on this theme we could turn on the tap by opening the works of the Stoics and it would run till we had a bathful. But throughout this inquiry we must be careful never to adopt prematurely a moral or evaluating attitude. The human mind is generally far more eager to praise and dispraise than to describe and define. It wants to make every distinction a distinction of value, hence those fatal critics who can never point out the differing quality of two poets without putting them in an order of preference as if they were candidates for a prize. We must do nothing of the sort about the pleasures. The reality is too complicated. We are already warned of this by the fact that need pleasure is the state in which appreciative pleasures end up when they go bad, by addiction. For us at any rate the importance of the two sorts of pleasure lies in the extent to which they foreshadow characteristics in our loves, properly so called. The thirsty man who has just drunk off a tumbler of water may say, "By Jove, I wanted that." So may the alcoholic who has just had his nip. The man who passes the sweet peas in his morning walk is more likely to say, "How lovely the smell is." The connoisseur after his first sip of the famous claret, may similarly say, "This is a great wine." When need pleasures are in question we tend to make statements about ourselves in the past tense, when appreciative pleasures are in question we tend to make statements about the object in the present tense. It is easy to see why. Shakespeare has described the satisfaction of a tyrannous lust as something past reason hunted and, no sooner had, past reason hated. But the most innocent and necessary of need pleasures have about them something of the same character, only something, of course. They are not hated once we have had them, but they certainly die on us with extraordinary abruptness, and completely. The scullery tap and the tumbler are very attractive indeed when we come in parched from mowing the grass, 6 seconds later they are emptied of all interest. The smell of frying food is very different before and after breakfast. And, if you will forgive me for citing the most extreme instance of all, have there not for most of us been moments, in a strange town, when the sight of the word gentleman over a door has roused a joy almost worthy of celebration in verse? Pleasures of appreciation are very different. They make us feel that something has not merely gratified our senses in fact but claimed our appreciation by right. The connoisseur does not merely enjoy his claret as he might enjoy warming his feet when they were cold. He feels that here is a wine that deserves his full attention, that justifies all the tradition and skill that have gone to its making and all the years of training that have made his own palate fit to judge it. There is even a glimmering of unselfishness in his attitude. He wants the wine to be preserved and kept in good condition, not entirely for his own sake. Even if he were on his deathbed and was never going to drink wine again, he would be horrified at the thought of this vintage being spilled or spoiled or even drunk by clods, like myself, who can't tell a good claret from a bad. And so with the man who passes the sweet peas. He does not simply enjoy, he feels that this fragrance somehow deserves to be enjoyed. He would blame himself if he went past inattentive and undelighted. It would be blockish, insensitive. It would be a shame that so fine a thing should have been wasted on him. He will remember the delicious moment years hence. He will be sorry when he hears that the garden past which his walk led him that day has now been swallowed up by cinemas, garages, and the new bypass. Scientifically both sorts of pleasure are, no doubt, relative to our organisms. But the need pleasures loudly proclaim their relativity not only to the human frame but to its momentary condition, and outside that relation have no meaning or interest for us at all. The objects which afford pleasures of appreciation give us the feeling, whether irrational or not, that we somehow owe it to them to savor, to attend to and praise it. It would be a sin to set a wine like that before Louis, says the expert in claret. How can you walk past this garden taking no notice of the smell? We ask. But we should never feel this about a need pleasure, never blame ourselves or others for not having been thirsty and therefore walking past a well without taking a drink of water. How the need pleasures foreshadow our need loves is obvious enough. In the latter, the beloved is seen in relation to our own needs, just as the scullery tap is seen by the thirsty man or the glass of gin by the alcoholic. And the need love, like the need pleasure, will not last longer than the need. This does not, fortunately, mean that all affections which begin in need love are transitory. The need itself may be permanent or recurrent. Another kind of love may be grafted on the need love. Moral principles, conjugal fidelity, filial piety, gratitude, and the like, may preserve the relationship for a lifetime. But where need love is left unaided, we can hardly expect it not to die on us once the need is no more. That is why the world rings with the complaints of mothers whose grown-up children neglect them and of forsaken mistresses whose lovers' love was pure need which they have satisfied. Our need love for God is in a different position because our need of Him can never end either in this world or in any other. But our awareness of it can, and then the need love dies too. The devil was sick, the devil a monk would be. There seems no reason for describing as hypocritical the short-lived piety of those whose religion fades away once they have emerged from danger, necessity, or tribulation. Why should they not have been sincere? They were desperate and they howled for help. Who wouldn't? What appreciative pleasure foreshadows is not so quickly described. First of all, it is the starting point for our whole experience of beauty. It is impossible to draw a line below which such pleasures are sensual and above which they are aesthetic. The experiences of the expert in claret already contain elements of concentration, judgment, and disciplined perceptiveness, which are not sensual. Those of the musician still contain elements which are. There is no frontier, there is seamless continuity between the sensuous pleasure of garden smells and an enjoyment of the countryside, or beauty, as a whole, or even our enjoyment of the painters and poets who treat it. And, as we have seen, there is in these pleasures from the very beginning a shadow or dawn of, or an invitation to, disinterestedness. Of course, in one way we can be disinterested or unselfish, and far more heroically so, about the need pleasures. It is a cup of water that the wounded Sidney sacrifices to the dying soldier. But that is not the sort of disinterestedness I now mean. Sidney loves his neighbor. But in the appreciative pleasures, even at their lowest, and more as they grow up into the full appreciation of all beauty, we get something that we can hardly help calling love and hardly help calling disinterested, towards the object itself. It is the feeling which would make a man unwilling to deface a great picture even if he were the last man left alive and himself about to die, which makes us glad of unspoiled forests that we shall never see, which makes us anxious that the garden or bean field should continue to exist. We do not merely like the things, we pronounce them, in a momentarily godlike sense, very good. And now our principle of starting at the lowest without which the highest does not stand begins to pay a dividend. It has revealed to me a deficiency in our previous classification of the loves into those of need and those of gift. There is a third element in love, no less important than these, which is foreshadowed by our appreciative pleasures. This judgment that the object is very good, this attention, almost homage, offered to it as a kind of debt, this wish that it should be and should continue being what it is even if we were never to enjoy it, can go out not only to things but to persons. When it is offered to a woman we call it admiration, when to a man, hero worship, when to God, worship simply. Need love cries to God from our poverty, gift love longs to serve, or even to suffer for, God, appreciative love says, we give thanks to thee for thy great glory. Need love says of a woman I cannot live without her, gift love longs to give her happiness, comfort, protection if possible, wealth. Appreciative love gazes and holds its breath and is silent, rejoices that such a wonder should exist even if not for him, will not be wholly dejected by losing her, would rather have it so than never to have seen her at all. We murder to dissect. In actual life, thank God, the three elements of love mix and succeed on another, moment by moment. Perhaps none of them except need love ever exists alone, in chemical purity, for more than a few seconds. And perhaps that is because nothing about us except our neediness is, in this life, permanent. Two forms of love for what is not personal demand special treatment. For some people, perhaps especially for Englishmen and Russians, what we call the love of nature is a permanent and serious sentiment. I mean here that love of nature which cannot be adequately classified simply as an instance of our love for beauty. Of course many natural objects, trees, flowers, and animals are beautiful. But the nature lovers whom I have in mind are not very much concerned with individual beautiful objects of that sort. The man who is distracts them. An enthusiastic botanist is for them a dreadful companion on a ramble. He is always stopping to draw their attention to particulars. Nor are they looking for views or landscapes. Wordsworth, their spokesman, strongly deprecates this. It leads to a comparison of scene with scene, makes you pamper yourself with meager novelties of color and proportion. While you are busying yourself with this critical and discriminating activity, you lose what really matters: the moods of time and season, the spirit of the place. And of course Wordsworth is right. That is why, if you love nature in his fashion, a landscape painter is, out of doors, an even worse companion than a botanist. It is the moods or the spirit that matter. Nature lovers want to receive as fully as possible whatever nature, at each particular time and place, is, so to speak, saying. The obvious richness, grace, and harmony of some scenes are no more precious to them than the grimness, bleakness, terror, monotony, or visionary dreariness of others. The featureless itself gets from them a willing response. It is one more word uttered by nature. They lay themselves bare to the sheer quality of every countryside every hour of the day. They want to absorb it into themselves, to be colored through and through by it. This experience, like so many others, after being lauded to the skies in the 19th century, has been debunked by the moderns. And one must certainly concede to the debunkers that Wordsworth, not when he was communicating it as a poet, but when he was merely talking about it as a philosopher, or philosophaster, said some very silly things. It is silly, unless you have found any evidence, to believe that flowers enjoy the air they breathe, and sillier not to add that, if this were true, flowers would undoubtedly have pains as well as pleasures. Nor have many people been taught moral philosophy by an impulse from a vernal wood. If they were, it would not necessarily be the sort of moral philosophy Wordsworth would have approved. It might be that of ruthless competition. For some moderns I think it is. They love nature in so far as, for them, she calls to the dark gods in the blood, not although, but because, sex and hunger and sheer power there operate without pity or shame. If you take nature as a teacher, she will teach you exactly the lessons you had already decided to learn. This is only another way of saying that nature does not teach. The tendency to take her as a teacher is obviously very easily grafted onto the experience we call love of nature. But it is only a graft. While we are actually subjected to them, the moods and spirits of nature point no morals. Overwhelming gaiety, insupportable grandeur, somber desolation are flung at you. Make what you can of them, if you must make it all. The only imperative that nature utters is, look. Listen. Attend. The fact that this imperative is so often misinterpreted and sets people making theologies and panthologies and antitheologies, all of which can be debunked, does not really touch the central experience itself. What nature lovers, whether they are Wordsworthians or people with dark gods in their blood, get from nature is an iconography, a language of images. I do not mean simply visual images, it is the moods or spirits themselves, the powerful expositions of terror, gloom, jocundity, cruelty, lust, innocence, purity that are the images. In them each man can clothe his own belief. We must learn our theology or philosophy elsewhere. Not surprisingly, we often learn them from theologians and philosophers. But when I speak of clothing our belief in such images, I do not mean anything like using nature for similes or metaphors in the manner of the poets. Indeed, I might have said filling or incarnating rather than clothing. Many people, I am one myself, would never, but for what nature does to us, have had any content to put into the words we must use in confessing our faith. Nature never taught me that there exists a God of glory and of infinite majesty. I had to learn that in other ways. But nature gave the word glory a meaning for me. I still do not know where else I could have found one. I do not see how the fear of God could have ever meant to me anything but the lowest prudential efforts to be safe, if I had never seen certain ominous ravines and unapproachable crags. And if nature had never awakened certain longings in me, huge areas of what I can now mean by the love of God would never, so far as I can see, have existed. Of course, the fact that a Christian can so use nature is not even the beginning of a proof that Christianity is true. Those suffering from dark gods can equally use her, I suppose, for their creed. That is precisely the point. Nature does not teach. A true philosophy may sometimes validate an experience of nature cannot validate a philosophy. Nature will not verify any theological or metaphysical proposition, or not in the manner we are now considering. She will help to show what it means. And not, on the Christian premises, by accident. The created glory may be expected to give us hints of the uncreated, for the one is derived from the other and in some fashion reflects it. In some fashion. But not perhaps